6.5%, was it? Is that what the current odds are of the Stanley Cup?
Well, and if you look at the round-by-round progression, the Stanley Cup favorite is the Vancouver Canucks.
Like, what a time to be alive!
Talking you through every goalie controversy, scoring slump, and draft lottery bust, this is the C4 Podcast on CanucksHockeyBlog.com. Here they are, the best starting lineup we could afford under the salary cap. Chris, Matt, Anna, and Adam.
Welcome to another episode of the C4 Canucks Hockey Podcast, brought to you by the Full Press Coverage Network and CanucksHockeyBlog.com. I am Chris at Lightforce, joined virtually, not by Anna Forsyth at A4Sayer3. No, not at all. Nor am I joined by former co-host Clay Emo at Canuck Clay, who joined me last week for a rendition of Chris and Clay's Canucks commentary. But the C4 remains strong because this week it is Chris and Chris Canucks commentary, because I am joined with the one and only Chris Faber at Chris Faber 39, which I can't imagine a listener of ours doesn't either one know about or already follow you. But thanks for batting for Anna here this week, Chris.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to get back on, and I've been on the show before, so hopefully the longtime listeners have remembered that. It was funny today. I was explaining to my girlfriend what show I was doing, and she doesn't listen to a lot of Canucks podcasts, but she's aware of a lot of them. She's like, "Which one are you doing today?" I said, "C4. It's the longest running Canucks podcast." She's like, "Who are the hosts?" And I said, "Chris and Anna." And she's like, "Oh, I didn't know that Anna does a podcast. I see her being sassy on Twitter all the time, though." And I was like, "Yes, that's Anna." So I'll try and fill in the sass here. But at the same time, I remember meeting Anna in person at your guys' get together pre-pandemic there, and she wasn't as sassy in person as she is online. Really,
it's funny you mention that, because I feel that her online persona is very sassy. Like, it's very full of vitriol, but I think she almost dials it back, because she is that way in person. Once she sort of, gets to know you, warms up a little bit. I kind of feel that it's maybe the Canadian influence. Mm-hmm. She feels that she needs to be just that little bit more polite, or possibly it's many of us that might not understand that sort of vitriolic wit or humor that Brits generally possess.
Yeah, I was wondering how long it took her to get the British jokes out, little sayings and things that I've heard sprinkled throughout the show. And before we get going, I got to say, congrats. You guys didn't celebrate it as hard as I was expecting on 300 episodes the other week.
No, I know. Well, so the 301 was last week. This week's 302. And Anna and I had sort of talked about it. Do we want to do a big thing for 300? Because 300, in the grand scheme of Canucks podcasts, at least, is a pretty big number. I know, Pucks and Nuts celebrated their 300 over the course of the summer, or it might have been fall, but it was this year. And, congratulations to them. And we still have the 2-month head start on the show that they do. They're the second longest running. They might not be the best mediocre, because they're probably not mediocre. But no, I don't know why we didn't. I think it was just a matter of everything that was going on. And it coincided with just a weird week. We were down on the team. Obviously, things weren't going so well. Anna and I happened to go and have to reschedule when we were going to record, because she was going to a hockey game on the Monday night. And that Sunday, stuff happened. So I think we almost forgot about it.
That's kind of what I was saying. Chris, from hearing you talk about Jim Benning over the years, I thought it was going to be a very big celebration on the 300 episode, with the fact that was the day that everything really fell apart. And I remember hearing Anna talk about it on the show, and I was doing my first play-by-play broadcast with James Zabalski on the Abbotsford Canucks, and second period starts, and all this news starts to break, and it basically turned into a podcast on the first play-by-play job I was ever doing with the Abbotsford Canucks, as I was doing color alongside Seaball there. And I kept telling him, I was like, "Hey, maybe let's get back to the game. We got some action going on." And Seaball just wanted to basically do the second period as a podcast, which was fine by me. But I was thinking in the back of my head, I was like, gotta kind of seem professional here and act like, I do a good job on the color. So it was tough, but it was an interesting Sunday, that's for sure, as news poured out throughout the day.
Yeah, well, I really appreciated the two of you reporting that Jack Rathbone had left the game and was potentially called up as the Canucks' new GM. I would have, I shouldn't be facetious, but I would have been okay with that. But no, I mean, back to sort of the episode 300. I think we'll probably celebrate some odd number, like, I don't know, 323 or some silly stuff like that. But it'll be a New Year thing. Speaking of a New Year thing, that's probably when we might see Canucks hockey again, or if not, pretty close to it. So we'll get into that in this episode. I obviously want to hear about your thoughts on what happened that night that we recorded episode 300 with all the changes of the Vancouver Canucks, what they've actually been up to. And I'm also genuinely curious what you've been up to, because if I am keeping score, you have like 7, 8, 9 jobs and different, broadcasting opportunities. And I know that you stay up late to watch the KHL too. So how you manage all of that, you'll have to tell us a little bit later in the show.
Yeah, I don't manage it well. I take a lot of naps, but we'll get into that later.
One other thing I actually just thought of before we get into Rewind here. I think I'm the host who puts your girlfriend to sleep. I think my voice is the one that on long road trips was the one that sort of set her to relax. Was that, or was there someone else I'm thinking of?
No, you're right. It was, so yeah, we were doing a long road. This is, I guess summer of 2020, maybe. We were heading up on a road trip and you guys had quads on. So she might've just been trying to get away from Quads' voice, because she doesn't like David Quadrelli, my co-host, very much, because Quads takes up so much of my time, whether it be writing at Canucks Army and him cracking the whip on me to get, 20 plus articles out a month, or if it's podcasting. So she might've just been trying to get away from that voice. But yeah, I mean, she was saying that your voice did kind of help put her to sleep that day on the road trip. So she appreciates it. And I don't mean that in a bad way towards you, Chris. I hope you take that as a positive, because she likes the Canucks, and it's been funny to watch her just like become a Canucks fan because of me, kind of, right? Like we've been dating since the pandemic kind of started. And she wasn't a hockey fan before. She didn't go to an NHL game until about a month ago, was her first actual NHL game. So I always say it's funny, like her Burrows era is Kyle Burrows. Like she doesn't know much about Alex Burrows or anything like that. But yeah, the road trip, your soothing voice helped as we were driving about 6 hours over there to Kelowna.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it did prompt Anna and I more recently to think about a Patreon opportunity where we can do ASMR by C4 or something like that. But maybe I'll stick a pin in that one and consider it in 2022. But let's get on to what I wanted to talk about, and that's the Vancouver Canucks. We've alluded to the fact there were changes, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But since those changes have happened, I mean, and since our last show, the one that I had with Clay, the Vancouver Canucks have maintained their crazy streak, hammering out a number of wins in games where they may not have been the best team, but they're drinking a whole lot of that confidence and just making a serious go of it. Is this simply the team that we should have had all along? Is this Boudreau somehow unleashing what had been always contained within? Like, what is the impetus for the Vancouver Canucks to do what they were doing?
I think it's a massive change in just the style of play that they're playing. And I think a lot of it is coming from Bruce Boudreau and the way that he wants them to go out there and play, and wants to give young guys opportunity, and wants to let players just be able to do their own thing. One of the quotes that I didn't see really get circulated around a lot, or even talked about on a lot of podcasts, because Chris, I listen to every single Canucks podcast, all 158 of them, or however many you mentioned. But I listened to a ton of podcasts, and I didn't hear a lot of people talking about the quote that Boudreau said in his first availability, where he said, all these hockey players are smart. Like, they're all smart hockey players. And I say 99% of NHL hockey players are smart. The other 1% go to the KHL. But these are smart hockey players. To get to this level, these guys that are playing at such a high level throughout junior and, even down to like the age of 10. Like, I would think about a guy like Steven Stamkos, even down to like a Tyler Mott, like that big range of players from high end to low end. When they're at the age of 10, I bet they have video on them. And I bet they're watching back the videos, especially nowadays. Like, I know nowadays, kids that are at a high level at age 10 on are getting video broken down of them, and they're learning the game, just being so smart about playing hockey. And that was something that Boudreau said, was like, he wants to trust in these players. And if a player comes up to him and says, hey, I'd like more minutes, he's like, okay, I'll give it to you. But if you don't succeed with those new added minutes, then I'm not going to do it to you again. And he talked similar about the penalty kill as well. There's a lot of skilled, talented players on this Canucks roster, Like there obviously is. We see it with everybody, all the stars of Quinn Hughes down to the third and fourth line guys. There's a lot of talent on this team. It just seems like the talent wasn't being utilized correctly under Travis Green. He was trying to play under Travis Green's system. To me, I don't know if there's a Bruce Boudreau system. It feels like Bruce Boudreau's system is up to how the players are going to bend around it.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that sort of was going to lead into my follow-up was, couldn't Travis Green not have done the same thing? Like, why was there a Travis Green system that was so, set in stone? And we almost saw that when things got rough, they committed even more to the system that I think was clear to most wasn't working. Like there was a problem, there was a malaise, and even in games where the Vancouver Canucks outplayed their opponent, they still found a way to let in 7 goals and lose, right? So to your point that there isn't necessarily a Bruce Boudreau system, it would almost do occur that it's the loosening of reins. Hey guys, go have fun. Is that really it?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of the confidence that he's been able to instill in these players as well. Like we think back to the first period when they were down 3-0 the other night and came back from the 3-0 deficit. Bo Horvat talked about what Boudreau came in and said after the first intermission, and he basically just said, like, you guys got to get back to doing what you're good at. Like that's a big thing that I don't think you would hear out of Travis Green's mouth. Like he would want to preach his system. We got to get back to this system. Boudreau goes out and tells these players, get back to what you guys are good at. Go back out there and forecheck as hard as you can. And that's kind of how a lot of those goals in that big 3-0 comeback came, was great forechecks from Tanner Pearson and JT Miller to set up Brock Besser and just forcing the play in the neutral zone to let your guys have the opportunity to be on the offense. To me, it feels like the way that Boudreau's system, if you want to call it that, because I guess it is his system. I don't want to say it's all the players. It is a system that he is trying to run. But his defending seems to be a big point of focus of, I think, the defending in Bruce Boudreau's system is in the offensive zone. Like when they're in the offensive zone forechecking or in the neutral zone defending so that teams can't enter their zone, that's like where his defense really shows. And it's something that you wouldn't really expect, because when you talk about a defensive system, talk about how they're defending in their own zone. And like we saw a lot of that with Travis Green, obviously, as the head coach. So maybe they got a lot of practice in their own zone. But what I'm loving is just the aggressiveness on the forecheck and seeing these players be able to do things where, when we saw the Lotto line really be one of the best lines in the league, a lot of it was just transitional offense that they were creating scoring chances from, like good forechecks, turning over pucks, and getting quick shots. And Brock Besser's 2-goal night the other night was a perfect example of that, where quick turnover, he finds the quick little open space area to get a shot off, scores 2 goals just exactly like that. And it's working really well under Bruce Boudreau so far. I don't think it could be going much better, honestly, at 6-0. And I think it shocked all of us to see it, but it is a different brand of hockey, and it's a brand of hockey that I think fits this roster so much better.
Yeah. Well, I think back to sort of what Anna and I had talked about at the start of this season. And I mean, we had said that, I refer back to the Grant Fuhr of the Edmonton Oilers. This is a dominant team. Grant Fuhr was a decent goaltender, but the Oilers won games like 8-6. And what they did is they played an aggressive style of hockey, high octane. We're going to put pucks past you, and we know our goaltender will make a couple saves, and that'll be the difference. And I think the Vancouver Canucks have always been constructed that way. The difference, though, is they have relied on the hot goaltending to backstop that 1-goal game they might get, or that 1-goal lead forever. And it started to fall apart. I mean, the blue line, I feel, is still a weak link, probably the weakest. But you had mentioned how we have this much more aggressive forecheck, and you almost start to defend in the opposition zone. Well, it's a whole lot easier to keep your blue line from causing you some duress if the forecheck is so aggressive it never gets to that point, or you've created such problems that you've countered the opposing system. That said, is this sustainable? I mean, I know it's not, but like, Anna and I had chatted about how there would probably, if a coaching change were to occur, there was going to be a bounce back. I mean, we see this time and time again. There is a professional player bounce back that occurs. The players take it upon themselves and say, we're going to go and, prove that we're not the problem, or if we were, we've turned it around. And plus, you got a new boss. You got to go and show that new boss that your give a shiznit meter exists. I maybe saw that the first game, second game. Now I'm kind of wondering if this is a team that believes in itself and thinks it can do anything. Clay last week, I asked him seriously, do you think this team could make the playoffs? And, he's a positive guy. And he said, I'm not certain, but if this continues, I mean, obviously we don't know when it will continue at this point, but is this something that the Vancouver Canucks can continue to do when they get back on the ice?
Yeah, I mean, they've definitely put themselves in a position to have that conversation, right? I mean, 6 wins has gotten them into the conversation. I don't think they're in a conversation of really being a competitive team in the playoffs at this point. They still, at this point, and even after this big 6-game run, they still need to win 2 out of 3 games the rest of the year.
Mm-hmm.
Basically 2 out of 3 the rest of the year. And that's something that Boudreau talked about, right? Like, he was like, we just win the week every week. But winning every single week, like, he was like, oh, it doesn't sound as daunting. It kind of does. Like, winning every single week the rest of the year, that's still pretty tough to do. So it's definitely a long uphill battle, but they are taking steps up that hill, like, early on in this Boudreau era.
Yeah, well, and that's it. 2 out of 3 games and win the week. And it is daunting if you look at the course of the entire calendar. But just on this one run alone, the Vancouver Canucks have essentially, if you think larger, have won the month. They've gotten enough wins that over the course of 4 weeks, all they now need to do is win 2 more games in total. I mean, obviously, in the grand scheme, it all adds up, and that may not still be enough. But I don't see, short of this current postponement, this team being derailed. I was looking forward to the game against the Maple Leafs in so much that I felt it would be the first real test of this team. And not to suggest that they have been playing against weaker competition, but the Leafs are a top-tier regular season team.
Yeah, I was excited for it. I mean, that Saturday would have been a lot of fun, and that's true, because you look at these 6 games that they have played, and I mean, some okay teams in there. You faced off against the Hurricanes. That's one of the top teams in the league. They end up getting I thought that win might have been one of the, I wouldn't say most impressive, but I think the grittiest win under Boudreau was that 2-1 win over the Hurricanes, because they were severely outshot in the shot attempt department. And that's what the Hurricanes are going to do, right? The Hurricanes fire so many shots on net. They might not even be shots on net, but just shot attempts. But to see them come back from that win against the Blue Jackets after beating one of the best teams in the league, like, you're right, Chris, like, they were about to start rolling, it felt like, after those 2 huge wins against one of the best teams in the league, and then a 3-0 deficit to come back from that. Like, I know that if you would have looked at that Toronto Maple Leafs game 2 weeks ago, you would have been like, hey, maybe that's the day. Maybe that's the day that Benning gets fired. Like, maybe that's the day, but now we were all excited for it.
Yeah, like, I think back to sort of the 2010, 2011, 2012 teams. The Vancouver Canucks could be down 4-0, and you'd still think, yeah, they got a chance. I mean, once they get in the third period, they're going to own that period. We knew that was going to happen. Like, I'm not suggesting this team is there, but when they went down 3-0, while I had sort of resigned myself, okay, here's the loss, it was bound to happen. The moment Bo scores that goal, and I mean, it's just one, and they're still down 2, I'm like, here's the comeback. Like, that frame of mind did not exist. Even in the bubble, I don't think it existed. And the bubble hockey was probably the best hockey we've seen from this team in recent years. In the bubble, it was like, please score first, because I think our goaltender will be doing enough. Whereas in this particular situation, the Vancouver Canucks could have been down, 3-0, 4-0, and I'm thinking, they might, they just need a puck to go in early enough to cue the comeback. So am I barking up the wrong tree here, or is this given some of these feels from back then?
I mean, very early, but at the same time, you're right. Like, to come back from that game, what was it? It was the first time, like, in 5 years since they've had a 3-0 deficit win. I believe the stat was thrown around there. You were starting to see the star players actually play and put up a decent amount of points, which was something we didn't see in the first 25 games at all. Like, things were starting to click. And obviously this break is definitely gonna make it tough to kind of get back on track. But to me, a lot of it is, and you hear from this, every player is going to say this because it's kind of the typical hockey answer, but they all talk about confidence in postgame. Like, Brock Besser, no matter what you ask him, he's going to say confidence in his answer right now over the Zoom meetings that we're doing. So there is confidence in this group. And I think a lot of that is being instilled by the head coach. Like, the head coach is doing a great job of making these players confident. You think back to that first practice with Brock Besser where Boudreau was like, man, I didn't even know who the hell you were in that first game. You come in here and you put up 2 goals on us in your first game. Like, that's when he was the Minnesota coach. And to hear that as a player, you're like, oh yeah, like I did do that. Like I did do that when this guy was around. And then to him to say like, hey, Brock, shoot the puck more. We want you to shoot it from all angles. And we're seeing that from Besser now. Like he's shooting it, whether he's in the slot or on the half wall with a sharp angle, he's taking more shot attempts. I mean, coming into this next game, whenever we do get to that point, Besser has 10 plus shot attempts in his last 2 games. Like that's an impressive thing that we didn't see all season long from Besser. And that's what you want. You want him to do that. You want Pettersson to build off of that. You want Quinn Hughes to keep playing like he's playing. You want JT Miller to keep putting up these points. And when all that happens, and then you have Thatcher Demko behind all of that, like this team does have a chance to go on a decent run here. And it's wild what a coach can change with this group. And it's weird because I don't think just the everyday fan or even us podcasters, people that follow it a little bit closer than the everyday fan or people in the media, like I do think that we undersell what a coach can actually do. Like what a coach, the guy who's in the room talking to these players every day. But then when you see a message not being received by the players, like we saw with Travis Green near the end of his time, and seeing a message being absolutely received, like we're seeing right now with Bruce Boudreau as the running the team, it does definitely make a difference that I think a lot of us underestimated, kind of just without seeing the change actually happen.
Yeah. The final sort of thing I want to get into before we get into our discussion about the postponement, the addition of Bruce Boudreau obviously hasn't had an opportunity to put into place a significant system style, whether or not there's a system or not. But do you expect us to see more changes as he gets more familiar with the team? I mean, only a few games ago when Lamico scored, he's like, who's that guy who hasn't scored again? Because, I mean, in fairness, why would he know the entire roster already? He wouldn't. So I'm curious, like, what might we expect to see happen? Or do you think this is just going to be a season of, hey, let's roll the dice and have some fun?
Yeah, I still have it like clipped into my 650 when I'm producing at Sportsnet there. I got Bruce Boudreau calling him Vasily Pod's Killin', and I'm like, oh, I love that. That's like almost a nickname right there. But like to your point of rolling the dice, like I think that's a lot of the way that Bruce Boudreau plays the game, like wants his team to play the game. I think that they are going to try and go head to head against a lot of teams when it comes to scoring. And I think having Thatcher Demko as your backstop is really going to help you in that situation. And obviously, like you look at the way that Demko's had to deal with everything since he's become the starter. Last year was really tough, like very tough on him. We saw just a massive stretch of games in March where he was just getting bombarded with shots and scoring chances against. And it was a tough year for him. I think that any system change would be something that Demko would welcome, right? I think whether it be more 2-on-1s potentially coming his way instead of so much possession in his own zone, the thing that I'm excited for with Demko is just seeing how he fits in with a different system, because he put up such great numbers under Travis Green's system, that a system that didn't seem to work with the unit. Now we have something that is going to work, and it's little things just like I know that they talked about this, and I think some of the media members were tweeting it out, but they spent a bunch of time with the defenseman, Brad Hunt specifically, just getting them, or sorry, Brad Shaw specifically, the assistant coach, just flipping the puck out of their own zone. And that's something that we've seen teams like Carolina and Toronto do for years now, where, yeah, maybe their defense isn't that great, but you can teach a 10-year-old how to flip a puck out of his own zone into the neutral zone and let your guys go up and chase it. And I think just little things like that, those are really going to help add up to not having such long possessions in your own zone and potentially creating odd man rushes, which is where I think a lot of the Canucks' offense is going to come from.
Mm-hmm. Fair play. So we've alluded to it. The Vancouver Canucks are currently postponed. If for some reason you as one of our listeners weren't aware of that, Vancouver Canucks obviously were supposed to play the Toronto Maple Leafs this past weekend. That game got postponed a day of. Ashton Saunter, who had signed a pro contract because ultimately Abby was short. Canucks needed a player. Myers had just gone on a protocol. He gets a pro deal. I presume the call-up still counts. He got his NHL paycheck for a day. But Sunday, tonight's game, we're recording a day early, it got postponed. And then word comes out that cross-border travel is not happening in the NHL for the at least duration of sort of what would be the traditional holiday break. And that meant the Vancouver Canucks had one home game left, and that too is postponed. Why? Because that's Anaheim. So the COVID situation is obviously evolving. I mean, I think, know that this has just been in constant evolution since the beginning of the pandemic. The NHL as a league, however, has taken a very proactive approach to testing. I mean, I think they have one of the most rigorous testing regimes in the professional North American sports. And one of the results of this is that players, whether symptomatic or not, get tested. And if they test positive, they're pulled into protocol until subsequent testing can prove if I think it's a double positive. If you're asymptomatic, you're presumed positive, what have you. But why does this all come into play? Well, the Vancouver Canucks had some players go into protocol last weekend-ish, and then Tucker Poolman played the first period of the Jackets game, only be pulled out because of a late test result. And then the Vancouver Canucks, being equally concerned that, hey, there might be more going on, delayed their flight down to San Jose, tested. It sounds like all the players made it back, but now Myers is in a protocol. What do you think is going to occur should this type of situation continue? I know the NHL has come out with the NHLPA to say we need to play hockey, but the cap alone is going to be a problem because of how stringent the rules are. So, like, I'm genuinely curious how the Vancouver Canucks find their way back on the ice.
Yeah, and we've seen the idea of taxi squads be floated around again. I don't know if that could maybe be a temporary thing that could help organizations. It'll definitely rattle up the AHL, but I mean, it's the AHL. They deal with a lot of crap every single week, it feels like, as we've seen with the Abbotsford Canucks play back-to-back games with 5 defensemen this weekend. As per cap ramifications, with the 1 week kind of situation going on with COVID, once you test positive, going on IR is a thing that can kind of help teams with their cap. And it kind of depends also on salaries as well. Like Tyler Myers going on IR for COVID reasons, I believe makes quite a big difference compared to Tyler Mott going on IR for COVID reasons. So I'm sure that it's not going to make a massive difference for teams having to worry about their cap being fit, because the players that are coming in are going to be a lot of guys making under $1 million anyways. But I do think that the taxi squads is an interesting approach. I don't know if they're going to go with the full taxi squads like we saw last year, but I do think that there is a good chance that we do see maybe a 3 or kind of a 2 forward, 2 defenseman type look, potentially a goaltender as well. There is going to be some changes, I think, after this break that we're going to see kind of through Christmas into the new year. And this cross-border thing, it really affects the Vancouver Canucks. They don't play their next game against a Canadian team until the 8th, against January 8th against the Ottawa Senators. So they have a boatload of games that are scheduled, and I guess some of them postponed at this point already, to see when they're going to get their next game in. And to me, like, I do agree with what you said, Chris, at the start there about the NHL actually being proactive for once and taking the right steps. I was very much expecting the Canucks to play on Saturday night. Like, I was thinking that it's a big market game. Hockey Night in Canada is going to be there. They want their money. I thought the Canucks would want to have a full stadium, as it's kind of the way that things were setting up from the BC provincial government, was that, hey, this is like the last weekend hurrah, go to the bar with your friends. They weren't saying that, but that's kind of what it felt like, right? It was like the last time to go to a Canucks game is going to be this weekend before we go down to 50%, all that stuff. So I was pleasantly surprised. And as much as I would love to see hockey, it's a great getaway for everybody during this pandemic. With everything going on in the NHL and the massive amount of cases rising over 100 over the past couple of days, I was happy that the NHL actually postponed these games. And I think they're doing the right decision here, with cross-border being an issue, of course, but it'll be interesting. It's basically a day-to-day thing right now. Like what we're talking about tonight on Sunday night, probably a different situation what I'm talking with Dave tomorrow on 650. Like, it's going to be a very different, it's going to be a day-by-day kind of thing. And that sucks for us podcasters who put out a show every Monday, because by the time we come around, we're like, hey, we got a lot to talk about that happened on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So right now it feels like day-to-day to me. I'm hoping we can get to that Christmas break and then kind of reassess things after that.
Yeah. I mean, I look at the schedule, and I think the point on a cross-border travel, I genuinely believe it was only sort of like games where cross-border was involved was postponed because of the holidays, because the moment you test positive on the wrong side of the border, like here in Canada, you don't get on a plane. Like it is, legitimately throw you in a car and drive you. And at that point, I don't imagine crossing the border, they're going to let you in with a, positive test. Well, maybe if you are a citizen of said country, but the, post Christmas break, I think it's sort of all cards on the table again. I was reading, and I can't remember where, I wish I did so I could source it, but that one of the struggles the NHL is going to have is many of their teams, especially in the United States, but up here in Canada too, play in barns that have scheduled events, concerts, like things that weren't an issue last year when the buildings were empty, save for hockey or basketball or whatever, single sport, double sport stadiums existed. They run into a problem of when exactly do we have these games take place, outside of the intricacies of what might be going on in Arizona, where they might be without a stadium for all sorts of different reasons. But I just wonder if it's just this break, if it's like a circuit breaker almost that helps put the league into a better position so that they can continue. But I guess where I'm going with this is we're seeing calls from teams, from officials in the NHL saying, hey, why do we have to be tested so frequently? That's what's getting in the way of us playing hockey. And, look at the NFL. Do you think that the NHL will be not so much peer pressured, but pressured into softening things to allow for hockey to continue?
Yeah, again, one of these situations where I think you got to follow the money again, right? I mean, I think they've gotten to a point now where having empty arenas is something that the NHL probably doesn't want to get back to, as much as it's definitely going to benefit the fans going to the game. I know, I always say this, I'm not a doctor, but I still think that having a full stadium would make it tough if COVID's really starting to spread throughout. I do think that they do obviously follow a lot of the NFL, what the NFL does. I think specifically the NHL being a league that's also kind of in the same timeline as the NFL season. You're going to see this throughout, especially unprecedented circumstances where we haven't dealt with a pandemic before. I think you look at the NFL and the way that they have a lot of smart minds that are paid a lot of money and normally at the top of their fields making these type of decisions. The other thing for me is that's the United States, and lots of different opinions, I think, are floating around in the United States compared to what we see in Canada, where a good percentage, I believe, of people are pro-vaccine, are pro-staying home, are pro-canceling, hockey if it's going to be leading towards a spread of even more COVID. I think the NFL is such a powerhouse that they believe at some point, and I even felt this last year a little bit, that they could run through COVID. That just felt like they were such a powerhouse that they could do that. So I'd be worried if the NHL followed that perspective at all. But I do think at the same time, they have made some of their own decisions over the past week, which has been something that I have been pleasantly surprised about. And I hope that they continue to go that direction, because there are some, to see what happened to like the Calgary Flames there and how it ripped through the team. We saw it in Vancouver last year, and obviously different situations now with everyone vaccinated in the NHL, how it's affecting them. And I know that, we had a lot of angry texters on our show on Saturday saying, yeah, but they just have a cold, right? Like, let them go out on the ice. It's just a little bit of a cold. And it's like, they also tested positive for COVID. Then yes, they have a cold. They're also positive for COVID. And it's not really about, at this point, when you're double vaccinated, I think the worry is not so much about the super athletes that train every day or at that point, but it would be the people around them. And not only the people around them, but do we not have to look any further than Brandon Sutter? Like, Brandon Sutter was in better shape than 99.9% of everybody listening to this podcast, aside from maybe Nexus. I know he works out pretty hard. But like everybody that has seen that situation unfold right in front of us here, it makes no sense for me to kind of get lenient with it so they can get games in. I really think that I hope that a circuit breaker helps. I know that it's not going to be a massive long one either. So, day by day is kind of the way that I'm looking at the league for the next little bit here.
Yeah. Well, I sit back and I do wonder. I mean, the NHL has not been traditionally the progressive league. I mean, that says a lot in North America, but the fact that, they have sort of stayed the course, some of that has me thinking maybe the league has finally sort of turned a corner and potentially making smart decisions. Although the jaded part of me wonders, is it because the Canadian government won't give them the exemptions they'd need to continue to function in the market that actually funds the league? So
yes, that's a very good point as well. And I think with, to make things even more, muddy here, we obviously have the Olympics coming up as well. That's a big stretch of games where if the NHL players do not go to the Olympics, you have a lot of time there to fill in some games and figure it out. So there is kind of an avenue to really set yourself up with the most chance of being healthy over the next few weeks here and hopefully getting a reset. But it's also, NHL players, they all want to play. Like, I think that they're going to be kind of hoping to get on the ice as soon as possible. I know that not every team was hit like the Vancouver Canucks were last year, where when we saw Bo Horvat talk to Bruce Boudreau and say, hey, listen, we got some cases here. I think we shouldn't be practicing today. I don't think every team in the NHL would have done the same thing that the Canucks did, because the Canucks went through it last year and they saw what it could do. So, yeah, it's going to be like whatever everyone predicts is going to happen. The only guy I'd really be listening to right now is like Friedman and Merrick on 32 Thoughts. They would be the ones knowing the most out of everyone. Or, Thomas Durant has done some great reporting here. Patrick Johnson as well. Like, those are the guys that they have been actually reaching out to a lot of sources and giving us sort of an idea of what we might be seeing over the next few days. But I don't think they know either. I don't think the league knows what they want to do at this point. There's probably a lot of conversations being had every day about what they want to do to proceed here.
Yeah. And I think what surprised me the most was the fact that the league and the PA came out with a statement that said, we want games to continue. Obviously, they talk about the holiday break, cross-border travel. And I get that part where, again, if you're stuck in the States, stuck in Canada over the holidays, away from your family, that's a tough situation. But the fact that they didn't make the announcement, like, we're going to play, I kind of feel that they are maybe a more confident in that return than maybe they should be. But hey, you're right. I think day-to-day is the better approach. It could change tomorrow.
Yeah, I hope that they're day-to-day. Now that I think about it, I hope that they are going day-to-day with this and not also just being like, there's another couple of COVID cases. We'll cancel today's game, but we'll see what happens tomorrow. Maybe you guys don't get any more cases and we'll make you play tomorrow. I mean, we've seen what COVID's done. I'm fine taking a little bit of a break. I personally don't, like, as much as I'd like to see the Olympics happen, I don't think every NHL player is going to go to the Olympics. And I think that there's a lot of time there to kind of, make up a lot of these postponed games and maybe even have another circuit breaker at that point where the players can have a couple weeks off or a week off where they can get away from everything. And I know that sort of has worried some people as well, whether, players are obviously going to be as careful as they can, but some aren't. Some are going to be going out and using that week off to have a vacation and go out and see people and get that. And hopefully, to hear that all the players are vaccinated aside from Tyler Bertuzzi, it's been great to see that in the NHL. So that's at least a plus. And you just hope that everyone can stay safe and we can move past this as soon as possible. But I've been saying that for 2 years now. So we'll just hope for the best here.
And that's, I think, where the day-to-day approach makes most sense. We'll take ourselves a short break here. Listen to the C4 Canucks Hockey Podcast on CanucksHockeyBlog.com on the Full Press Coverage Network.
Take hitting out of the game. You can't hit anymore, so don't do it.
The unsportsmanlike conduct, I want to get an explanation on it.
No kidding.
Because how do you get suspended for unsportsmanlike conduct?
Plus interference. There's no interference there. He had the puck.
Now, Madison never ever did that before. Now, why did he do it? And that because he was mad.
Well, your early favorite for the Calder Trophy, that's for sure. Elias Pettersson, you might even say your early favorite for the Hart Trophy.
Just to get back to your question, Elias is going to play plenty. He's going to get a lot of power play time. And, yeah, I'm concerned about our offense. We lost 200-point players, and we've got to find a way to score.
As we get in a half full, half empty, I want to learn a little bit about what you've been up to, but I'm so sorry I got to go to something I saw on Twitter. There was recently a picture shared of you and our tire. I mean, we didn't get to see the whole you, but we did get to see the bottom you. And you had your socks pulled up nice and high, these nice sort of, I think it was what, gray socks might have been. But I'm an old man. I lack style. And I don't know if I pull my socks up like that. Like you had the grandpa look going there, Faber.
Yeah, that was, some days when I go in there to podcast, I want to be able to, speak my mind and not worry about the waistline, having the belt be too tight, having the socks be too low, too much air on the ankles, all these little things that'll throw you off when you're podcasting. So I've always had stupid style. I guess style is probably not even the right word for it. I've always leaned towards being as comfortable as possible. And sometimes you get caught in a moment like that where it's like, all the pants need to go into the wash at the same time and had to go with shorts. Like I've worn shorts probably in this month of December, probably 5 times. Like in the 19 days we've had here, I've still worn shorts like 5 times because I just get in the car and I go to work and I come home and I'm in a parking garage. Like I don't spend time outside. Maybe I'll go to Superstore, like get a couple groceries, something like that. But yeah, I still wear a lot of shorts.
Well, I was going to say, first of all, lightweight. I think I put on pants the first time this month today. It's always shorts. I mean, granted, I work from home, so like the dress code requirements are very, very limited, low. You having to sort of go somewhere. I don't imagine, if you're up in the press box or what have you, you can just roll in those comfy shorts and a loose tee. But
I haven't pulled it off in the press box yet, but it was funny. Like the first time I did color for the Abbotsford Canucks, the one and only time, like the game before that, they had 2 days, 2 games back to back, and I went to the one and I wore my suit that I just got. It was like a brand new suit. Was just wearing it to the game, and I wear that suit and I don't do anything on the broadcast. I go down the players, and the coach was Trent Cull was laughing about it because he's like, you normally roll up here and you're wearing comfortable clothes, and like I'll be wearing a hoodie or whatever. And then he's like, look at you all suited up, eh? And then the next day I come in and I was like, oh, I can get away with track pants today and, like a flannel shirt or whatever. And I pulled that off. And then we go to the post game and Trent Cole asked me, he's like, what were you doing? And I was like, oh, he's like, what were you doing? Like janitor work or something? And I was like, no, I did your guys' color tonight. He's like, oh, geez, could have fooled me. Looked like you should be cleaning toilets. And I was like, oh, man. So I didn't dress to impress on my first night doing color, but I got to crank it up a little bit in the press box too, especially when you go to Rogers Arena. So I've bought like 2 new suits in the last couple months here, which I'm excited about.
Yeah, so I have had an opportunity to sit in the press box for 2 games, not because I was press. It would just happen to be that's where I got seated for social media stuff back in the early days of Canucks Twitter, before Canucks Twitter was a thing. And both times I dressed up because all the pictures I had ever seen were of like people wearing suits. Because what do they show? They show like the players, the executives, and all of that. And I remember I showed up. I had like a shirt, tie, like I'm a young kid too. And I get up there, and Tony Gallagher. So when I lived in Vancouver years ago, I grew up, I was the same age as his son Ryan, and so Tony knew me. And he's like, Mr. Golden, what brings you here? And why are you dressed so well? Are you he was thinking like, is it that I'm like interning, or was I like gone into hockey or something like that? Like, oh, no, I'm here. Glad you remember me. But no, I dressed to impress because I didn't know what to do otherwise. I think now Chris, I might put jeans on.
Yeah, I think that's like a look now, though. You can do the blazer and jeans. Like I've liked how that fancy style has evolved a little bit. And it's like it's taken a couple of guys to go out, like Murph wearing a turtleneck on TV, or, seeing guys in the press box like Wyatt. Wyatt always has, I've seen Wyatt wear a sweatsuit, like a matching top and bottom into the press box. And I'm like, hey, if Wyatt can pull it off, I can get away with sweatpants someday into the press box.
Well, as long as they're dark, I mean, who's really going to actually question it?
See, that was my problem was with Trent Cull, was I was wearing like gray Under Armour sweatpants. So he called me out for that one pretty quick. I haven't pulled off shorts yet, but like I think I can get away with it in Abbotsford someday, especially if they get into the playoffs and maybe we're in like April or May and it's starting to be 17, 18 degrees out. Like I'll definitely go with shorts. And as for the socks, like I wore the socks super high in that picture that Quad took, but that was also sort of like, listen, I shouldn't be wearing socks today as I go outside, or I shouldn't be wearing shorts today as I go outside. But if I wear socks that are high enough, they're basically pants. Like if you have high enough socks and long enough shorts, you're basically wearing pants. Like what's the difference? It's clothing covering that part of your body. I know it's not technically pants, but it's doing the same job.
Yeah, I cannot argue with you about that point. I believe Anna, if she's going to listen to the show, will have a conniption. We're going to probably hear from her about this and the fact that you're considering socks pants. But let's talk a little bit about what you've been up to. When you last joined our show, you obviously had the Canuck Conversation podcast with Dave Quadrelli, and I believe at the time you were contributing to Canucks Army. And since then, you've seemingly picked up a gig or two. I understand you occasionally can be heard on the radio, for instance, or if I happen to be listening to an Abbotsford Canucks game, I can possibly hear your voice. So, first of all, congratulations. Since as long as I've ever known you, you've had some serious hustle, and I am extremely happy to see that your hard work continues to pay off.
Yeah.
So I mean that's phenomenal. But what is it that you're up to these days?
Yeah, I don't know. Like, can I do it in alphabetical order? Maybe I should start with Abbotsford. But yeah, first of all, I appreciate that. I mean, like, I think I have worked pretty hard to get here, so it's nice to see everything. I love when I have a week where like two good things happen, and it's like, wow, it's amazing to see the hard work pay off. But there's a lot of weeks where nothing good happens, and you're just working really hard. And there's a lot of those weeks that go by, but that's why I love celebrating the good things that do happen when they do. So, yeah, I got an opportunity to do the last Abbotsford Canucks color commentary. It was something I was kind of like trying to get going on Twitter in the off season, because like I wanted to do color. I feel like color would be a lot of fun for something to do. Like I also feel that my type of I guess skill set in media would kind of fit into doing color as well. I don't want to be the play-by-play guy. That would just worry me to kind of be running like that nonstop. But I had a lot of fun with James Cybulski doing play-by-play, which is super exciting for people out in Abbotsford that are watching these games on AHL TV. I know Anna, I don't think anyone watches more than Anna does on AHL TV. It's been great to hear the Abbotsford updates on the show here. But to have like the voice of the video game be your minor league voice play-by-play guy is a lot of fun. And I'm still waiting for Danila Klimovich to score a goal so I can drop a thank you Klim right back at Cybulski, because I know that's going to throw him through a loop at that point. So as soon as Klimovich scores, I cannot wait for that moment. I hope he doesn't listen to this, because I want to catch him off guard a little bit. But that's been fun. I hope I can do more of that moving forward. I think me and Seaball had a fun time that day, and heard some other people that were reviewing it that were good. And yeah, aside from that, still the senior writer at Canucks Army, doing some stuff in the community work as well. We just launched our beer, Nation Beer, with Canucks Army, which has been something that we've been working on for a long time. And then aside from that, I sort of have graduated. I've co-opted out of my last semester at BCIT, which is very exciting, because these past year and a half, I've also been a full-time student at BCIT, which has been that's the thing that's kicking my ass the most, because like I love doing everything else, and then it's like, hey, do this also do this podcast about just like nature. Do a 30-minute podcast about nature. That's your work for this week. And I'm like, God, I don't want to do a 30-minute thing about nature or some crap like that, or producing news videos as journalists. So you'll see my crap all over the BCIT YouTube account if you look for it right now. So I'm super excited to co-op out, and that opportunity has come from producing some shows at 650, doing the weekend show with Quads and I. We do it every Saturday or Sunday, depending on kind of when there's a Canucks game. We do the warm up into the pregame show. So keeping busy with a lot of things, man, that's for sure. And then obviously the podcast as well. So yeah, keeping busy. But man, I tell you, like, now that school is hopefully finished, I don't know exactly even what I'm really doing for a co-op, but from what I've heard, I'm not going back to class. So that's a good step in the right direction right now.
You failed to mention you also don't sleep, because if there's someone that can keep me up to date on what's going on in the KHL, it's Chris Fager.
Yeah, and I've had, like, I haven't been able to do it like I have in the past, but at the same time, there aren't as many A-level prospects like there was with Vasily Podkolzin and Niels Höglander, but we've got a great setup with our situation at Canucks Army, where we have a site that we work with where the clips and all the shift by shifts are uploaded. And I've never had that before, where I can just watch the shifts of a player. I've always had to wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning to do that, which I will stay up for still. I don't sleep well. Like I maximize my sleep at like 5 hours a night, which is, I know, not great. But what I try and think in my head is like, okay, if I sleep for 5 hours each day in a 7-day week, and I take 2-3 hour naps, that's like 40 hours of sleep a week. That sounds not bad. So I've been getting away with that for like 2 years now, and it hasn't killed me. So I'm going that way. But yeah, it's been fun. Like even just watching some of the double IHF World Championships this past weekend with the U20s and players like that, to see Belarus get themselves into the World Juniors, which is exciting news for Canucks fans, because now we'll get to see Danila Klimovich get an opportunity to play in the big World Juniors Championship next year, because Belarus has advanced into that division. So that's some exciting news. But yeah, it's toned down this year a little bit. Like there isn't a prospect like a Höglander or Podkolzin where I have to wake up and watch them and try and beat everyone else to the clips. I know Cam Robinson always pushes me pretty hard, and fan to Abby as well, who's just done still hasn't stopped. He's still covering every single prospect that is out there. So props to those two guys as well.
The show that you have on 650 on Saturdays, just out of curiosity, like, is that something that you had to sort of pitch, multiple times, or was it just sort of, circumstances worked out that you were able to go in and get on air? And second point, why is it that Anna or I have yet to be invited? I've seen many Canucks podcasters.
Yeah, you know,
I just want to say
it's
that.
funny.
I understand I'm down the list.
No, like you guys are near the top as well. The funny thing is they're pitching it. They're like, hey, you guys should do like a podcasters segment where you bring on a podcaster. I'm like, I like the idea of that, but I don't want it to be that. Like, I actually like hearing, like, I listen to all your guys' podcasts. I like hearing your guys' opinions. I don't want it to just be that you guys are the podcasters who come in the podcaster segment, because I think that you guys, to a degree, every podcast is sort of media, and they do a great job of that. So, Anna, and you will get a chance here very soon. Maybe I'll get your voice in there first to soothe the listeners a little bit. But the show, the way that it kind of came about was kind of funny, because like, as soon as I got hired as a producer, I said, listen, like, I moved over here to be a radio host on Vancouver sports radio. That's been my goal for a long time here, and I've been working towards it. I made that very clear to Craig McEwen when he was the boss, and now Cam Barra and now that he has taken over. I told that to Cam as well, like, hey, whatever I got to do to get to the point of being the host on whether it's the morning, midday, or afternoon show, like, that's my goal 100%, is to be on Monday to Friday talking about sports on Vancouver radio. And I was worried one day, like, I was at the Canucks game. I got to the press box nice and early, and I got a text from Cam Barra. And this was recently after he took over as the program director at Sportsnet 650. And he's done an incredible job since becoming that. I'm not only saying that because he gave us airtime, but I got a text from him. He's like, hey, I need to talk to you. And I was like, oh no. I was like, what did I forget to podcast? What did I screw up? Did I actually swear on air? Like, was my mic on while I was talking crap about someone? Like, what did I do? And then he came in, he's like, hey, we're looking to add some weekend content. Like, would you and Quads be interested? And I was like, yeah, like, absolutely. Like, when can we start? And he's like, how about Saturday? And this was on like the Monday at a Canucks game. And we're like, I was like, yeah, we'll figure everything out. And like, I called Quads right there from the press box. So I was covering for him that night. And then we just kind of put everything together and launched the show. And it's been a blast. Like, ever since our first show just blew up. The text lines have been crazy ever since we've started. Like, seeing that part of the reaction is something that's so much fun. Like, on the podcast, I know you've been able to do some live shows and get reaction live. It's so cool to have that live interaction on the text line. And we're just kind of growing it from here, getting some opportunities now with a lot of people off for Christmas holidays to do some shows during the week as well. We'll be on Monday, and then after Christmas, I think we have like 4 shows where we're covering for the afternoon show as well. So some exciting things for Quads and I in the next little bit here.
Yeah, well, remember the little podcast like C4 when you make it big time and you fill in nationally.
Well, you know what, Chris, I will never forget sweating so hard in that library room. So you have to know that I will never forget you guys, because I don't think I've sweat so much doing a recording in my life.
Hey, it's one of the benefits of coming on the show. Not only do you get to connect with our listeners, we guarantee you lose 5 pounds by the time you're done recording.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about the Vancouver Canucks again. So we were, before we hit the record button, chatting a little bit about some of the changes. And I think we also mentioned at the top of the show, it's been a while now, that you were somewhat surprised that I wasn't more celebratory about the change that it took place, considering that I think it's been very clear. I've not been a fan of Jim Benning as a GM. I understand that I've never played the sport, nor have I ever, truly been in a locker room. So how would I ever know what it's like to manage a team? But as a fan, I just, right from day one, kind of felt that there were other choices that the Canucks could have made. In fact, I was so curious. Did I ever actually ride the Jim Benning bus? I went back to some of our first episodes that Clay and I had, and I don't think I was ever really on board. But I'm curious, if I were to ask you this question, what do we remember the Jim Benning era for?
Jeez, I think the first thing that would pop to mind would be just horrible communication. And I'm not only talking about him being a public speaker, but just communicating the plan, because it felt like a lot of the time there was no plan. And, even hearing you talk about it on last week's episode was like just hearing Jim Rutherford talk about certain things where everything in Jim Rutherford's world isn't going to work out perfect, right? In Jim Benning's world, it felt like, well, you know what? We got Guillaume Brisebois. He's going to be coming up and playing, second pair lefty in a couple of years. Like, he's the guy. Like, we love Brisebois. Obviously, that hasn't worked out. I think that's something that we've just heard where everything felt like it was going to work out under Jim Benning, and so many things didn't, because he put confidence in foundational players like Brandon Sutter. He made big contracts to Louis Eriksson to bounce back and get the Sedins back. And so many of these things don't always work out. And I think that's something that we're seeing such a different feel from with Jim Rutherford, because he's been there and done that around a general manager for a long time. He's seen how often things fail. Like, you know, you talked about me watching prospects before, and yes, I like to hype up prospects. I like to be excited when a prospect scores a goal, but I'm well aware that, you know, probably 80% of these prospects that are picked after the second round, if not higher, they're never going to get to the NHL. But it's still good to be exciting and follow these guys, but you have to know that not everything's going to work out. And honestly, the way that I look back at the 8 years of Jim Benning was being told that so many things were going to work out. And the more that you're told that things are going to work out as the years go by and things consistently don't work out, why would you have any faith in believing what this guy is telling you about what he thinks is going to happen? Because he was wrong so many times, and it just continued to snowball and snowball and snowball to this point where a jersey gets thrown on the ice. And you're thinking, yeah, like that's totally fair at this point, because we've been sold so much crap for 8 years. And you mentioned it, Chris, like you could, I don't know, maybe your crapo-meter was pretty good in day one, because you've had it have it running in the red ever since he was hired.
Yeah, and Clay and I were chatting a little bit about it as well off the air, and I was like, I'm actually upset at myself that maybe I didn't give him a fair shot. But I feel like in the past few seasons, and even this is sort of before the pandemic, like the metrics did not make sense as to why Jim sort of still had employment, especially considering how, I go back to Mike Gillis. Whether you think he was a good GM or not matters very little, considering his team, whether it was the benefit of Dave Nonis, his team produced. It did exactly what it's supposed to do, save for that cup. And that was one game away. And he never got an opportunity to even try to go and rebuild, retool. Jim got himself, I don't know, it's like every 2 years, he got 2 more years, right? Like, oh, here, 2 years we're there, 2 years we're there. And then suddenly, oh my goodness, like this season we became the C4 Canucks playoffs podcast, because I just figured if it didn't happen this year, I could not understand when it would. But, can we give him credit to the prospect pool that exists? Or like there's argument that suggests that maybe that wasn't his strength either. You're a lot closer, obviously, to the team and sort of what's going on than I am or ever will be. Do we look back at Jim fondly for good things and see whatever GM comes in under Jim Rutherford for the future?
I think that there's some things where you have to look at with the drafting and say Jim Benning probably had the final decision on this, or at least was influenced in the right way to make good decisions. Ultimately, if you're picking 5th overall and you're the general manager, you're getting the final call. And they selected Elias Pettersson. They made a good decision there. Selecting Brock Besser in the early 20s, they made a good decision there. That's played out well. Quinn Hughes fell into their lap, obviously. I remember sitting there with one of my buddies. This was before I was really covering Canucks too in depth. I think I was writing at the Canuck Way or something, and I had a small podcast before Canucks Conversation. But I remember watching some of the names fall, and I was like, Quinn Hughes is going to land here. The Canucks are going to go out there and get Quinn Hughes, and that one kind of fell into their lap. But then you look at some of the other hits, and I look at a guy like Adam Gaudette being a nice hit in a late round pick, a guy that gets into the NHL, plays some games, maybe not the most incredible, but you get him in the 5th round and he's a guy who gets in the NHL, plays some games for you. That's better than most 5th rounders do. That's a Northeastern guy. You look at Jack Rathbone. He looks like he's got a pretty promising future. That's a guy from that kind of same area as well. Look at Aiden McDonough, who I believe might be the top prospect in the Vancouver Canucks system right now. He's got 13 goals and I think 19 games in the NCAA right now, one of the top scorers in the NCAA. Northeastern player as well for Northeastern University. And you look at that connection and you're like, wow, Judd Brackett, that was his area. He grew up in that area. He grew up watching Jack Rathbone as a kid. He went to Northeastern University and drafted 2 of the Canucks' best late round draft picks. So I think you can give credit to Jim Benning on listening to Judd Brackett and the other scouts in certain aspects. I think that some of these prospects that we've seen in the later rounds have been kind of where the Canucks have found a little bit of value, but haven't been able to execute that value into anything. After you have Jonah Gadjevich go to the World Juniors as kind of a shocker to go there. Maybe that's the time where you start to see if his value is something that you can utilize in a trade at that point, instead of losing him to waivers 2 years later, right? Like these type of spots where we've liked the drafting and then it has kind of just not emerged into anything. Like I think the Canucks have done a very poor job of dealing with their prospects after drafting them. You know, you talk about drafting and developing being something. We've seen them draft, I think, in a pretty good way, but the development has been something that I'd be worried about under Jim Benning's tenure. And I think that that's something that's going to have to change here, and I think will change with Jim Rutherford, because he's going to depend on a lot of his scouts to do the drafting. And then I think that's where a general manager has to take over and make sure that developing is just as important as what you're doing with scouting these players.
How much did the Vancouver Canucks sort of miss having the president of hockey operations? Like after Linden departed, there was really one voice as opposed to two on the hockey side. And that's not to suggest there's no other voices with Jim, but it has sort of come to light that Trevor and Jim saw things differently prior to Trevor's departure. Is that ultimately where things fell apart, do you think, or had it fallen apart well before that? And
yeah,
what was bound to happen?
Yeah, it felt like maybe there was a plan with Trevor Linden. Maybe there was a long-term plan. Like we'll never, maybe one day we'll hear about it, but not anytime soon. We'll hear about a plan that maybe Linden had. And like we've kind of touched on the last few minutes here, is it just felt like there never was a plan with Jim Benning. Like it just felt like everything was going to work out in his eyes as the general manager, and none of it really happened. So I love having a president in here that, like, I wouldn't be as excited about Jim Rutherford as the general manager as I am about him as the president, because I would love to see him kind of something that I don't know if I think he's talked about it, but I know a lot of media members have wrote about this and talked about this, of maybe he finds a general manager who he wants to help kind of really just become a general manager in their own end. Like there could be an AGM who's done a really good job, could be a young up and comer who he believes could be a future GM. I'd like to see him just be able to teach a guy his tricks of the trade that he learned as a GM, but maybe not be the final decision maker on a lot of everyday roster movements, but really have a big voice. And I think that's what a president can really help with this organization. Like I said, I don't think I'd love Rutherford as the GM full time, but I do really like him in the president's role, just from what he can bring to an organization with his knowledge and being around the game for so long.
Yeah. One thing I will admit, and again, sort of from the Rutherford side, I think for those that might see me on Twitter, I may have made a few comments, especially in C4 Discord, where I wasn't against the Rutherford signing. I just wanted the Canucks to be this progressive team, and just, this was the opportunity. Go and set your mark. You've done it before. Don't be scared to do it again. But in the short, week he's been here? I mean, just over that. We've had 3-4 press conferences. He's come out and he's articulated things. And I know I've actually given Jim some slack Benning some slack because he wasn't a communicator. It was not his wheelhouse. It would be like asking me to go and, bake a cake. Trust me, it ain't going to turn out well, but I'll put my best effort.
It's almost like when you ask me about COVID, sort of similar situation, right? Or hockey podcasters trying to talk about COVID to a degree.
It feels refreshing though. Like I almost like, oh, okay, cool. Like he's articulating well. And that's actually something that I think I didn't realize was happening when Trevor was here, is that Trevor was the guy that at least almost monthly, he was either on 1040, or I guess it would have been 650 then too, or whatever. Like he was present. You'd hear from him. You get the voice. He was articulate. He'd address tough questions, maybe not giving you the answer you would necessarily want, but you'd address it. And it feels like Jim is that breath of fresh air that's just been missing.
And you know what? Like a lot of it has been when he answers a question is just like, I don't know, but we're going to figure it out and I'll let you know. Like that, hearing that from him in a situation where a lot of these COVID questions that he doesn't know the answer to, him saying it instead of Jim Benning fumbling through some words to give an answer that doesn't really, and not even just day by day, not even just the way he talks, but like the way the answers were received by smart hockey fans, where it was like, I don't know, Jim, that doesn't make a lot of sense. That doesn't make, the fact, like, I thought that, props to Quads for this question, but asking him if he would still stick to that 2-year plan. The question that Quads asked Jim Benning before he was fired was like, can you give it, like, are you still sticking to that plan where you think you'll be competitive in 2 years? You said that, what was it, like 9 months before, and Quads brings up that quote, and Jim Benning just says, I don't want to comment on that right now. And it was like, so you just basically, that quote to me was like, that was the end. That was there. It's like, okay, well, your 2-year plan that was kind of, hopefully the last thing that you kind of told us about where this team's direction was going, that's out the window now. Like, I think he's got to go out the window with that last 2-year plan. And we kind of saw that over the last little bit here. I'm so with you, just saying that it is such a breath of fresh air to hear Rutherford talk, because he's honest. He's a better communicator. But to me, the big thing is, even since the day that we had Francesco Aquilini and Stan Smeel do that press conference, I felt honesty for the first time in a long time from one of those type of press conferences where it was either the GM or someone in upper management. That was the first time I came out of that press conference and it was like, Aquilini was honest on a lot of those questions. Stan Smeel was very honest on a lot of those questions. And
yeah, no kidding.
I never came out of a Jim Benning press conference and was like, yeah, that was a lot of honesty there from Jim Benning. You would always be like, okay, which quote are we breaking down as the one that seems like the biggest, sack of crap? Because it felt like there was always one of those quotes that came out of these pressers, and it doesn't feel the same way with Rutherford now. And even, props to Aquilini, who I thought spoke pretty well over the past couple of weeks here in front of the media.
Yeah. Well, no, and we talked about it actually, I think last week with Francesco, outside of with the Jim presser, where there were some questions that he obviously had been prepped for, and I think it was do not answer, but then felt compelled that he kind of had to and fumbled. But no, I think with Jim Rutherford, we saw quite explicitly, I don't know, ask that guy. Like, if you can go and say that with the boss right there.
That might have been my favorite Jim Rutherford thing right off the bat, when it was just like, well, Jim, what, I forget the exact way the question came, but it was about gear. Gear and Wall being let go, and it's just like it didn't even the question I feel like was even asked to kind of both of them, and Rutherford was like, yeah, not me, that's him, and then everyone was like, oh, so Francesco made the decision on that. Like, that was a news story right there that Rutherford probably didn't know he was setting up the owner for in that spot, but that was one of the funnier ones that we've had early on here.
Yeah. Just before we sort of wrap things up, a couple things that happened since our last show here on C4. The first one was Derek Clancy brought in as AGM. Is there anything you can tell us about this edition? I know he was under Jim Rutherford in Pittsburgh, but what do you know about him?
I don't know much about Clancy. I guess that was kind of one of the jobs that I think we would have kind of expected if he started to dig through which AGMs Rutherford has kind of had under his tutelage over his time. And I think Clancy was also there before Rutherford got there as well. So it's kind of someone that probably impressed him a little bit because it was someone that he didn't want to clean house with, similar to what we've seen with Wall. I guess, even though we kind of just said it wasn't really Rutherford's call. But to see Clancy come in, I excited to see a smart mind kind of added to this group. And it just makes a lot of sense to me, add a lot of these AGMs who can just be a different voice. And I think that's something that we've heard from Rutherford early on, is that yes, he ultimately goes with his gut on a lot of these final decisions, but to hear that he was open to communication, like, I've always loved Ray Ferraro's take on this over the years for the past little bit. You got to have a way to set guy, right? And maybe adding a few way to set guys into that AGM group, or way to set gals, with Jennifer Botterill being rumored as well. I think that, adding some names like that who can bring a different perspective and kind of make arguments for things. I love the idea of having a front office actually argue with each other about a lot of different things. I think that's something that we see every single year with scouting staffs across the league. You're going to get arguments for sure with a scouting staff. And if a scout can make an argument for a player in the 5th round on why they should take him, and he makes a good enough argument, presents enough data, then you're going to get that player. And it seems like those things work out for a lot of the times. We just don't really see that as much in the day-to-day operations from a general manager as we do with the scouting staff. And I think it'd be a good idea to kind of go the direction that we see at the draft every year with your group and having some smart minds come together. So I'm good for smart minds coming in. I'm good for more minds coming in as well. I hope that they're not done. I don't think they're done at all. Obviously, they don't have a GM at this point. So we'll see how that kind of builds through. But the next couple of weeks are going to be an exciting couple of weeks, hopefully, for the Canucks and their front office as Jim Rutherford looks to build it. Hearing him say, what did he say, 40 names he's got on a list right now that he's going through? Like, yeah, buddy, keep, go that direction for sure.
Yeah. I do need to, clarify a point you raised here about having a debate or an argument within the front office. I have it on good authority that happened under the Jim Benning era. Generally, it was, what does Weisbrod do? But
yeah, I think that might have been something that John Wall and Chris Gear might have brought up a few times. Actually, I don't think that those weren't Benning guys. Those were some of the names that if I had to guess somebody being a way to set guy. I think that those two would have been them. And I dealt with Chris Gear, wouldn't say a lot, but quite a few times over the years due to some legal things that we've dealt with. And he's always been great about everything. He helped me a lot with the Abbotsford Canucks as well. So in the off season, chatting with him about some stuff, great guy to deal with. And yeah, I think it's unfortunate, but those guys will find jobs to see the way that they've worked up in the Canucks organization. They, I think, were two of the guys that would have been pushing against Benning, or at least arguing, being a voice as the way to set guy. So I think that was an unfortunate let go for the Canucks. But at the same time, when you do want to change the culture, some people like that maybe have to go, right? Like maybe that is the way that Jim Rutherford was operating through it, though it did seem like that was an Aquilini call. Like I see both sides of that one. Or like I see both sides of yes, it would have been nice to keep these guys who have been here for a long time and done some pretty good things. Like, man, I look at the Quinn Hughes contract. I know that Chris Gear had his fingers all over that, like making that a good deal for the Canucks moving forward. I still think Pettersson's deal is going to look good in a couple years as well. He was all over that. They've done a great job of re-signing the RFAs, like Horvat's contract, Connor Garland's deal, Thatcher Demko's deal. Chris Gear was the guy running a lot of the money behind that. So that feels like a loss a little bit, but at the same time, like I said, if you're going to change a culture, sometimes you do have to do a big clean sweep of a lot of guys.
Yeah. And sort of use Chris Gear as a segue to the other update. In his sort of farewell tweet, his first tweet, he had a list of people that he wished well, and one name that was not included in the statement was Stan Smeel. Though he followed it up with a this is not meant to be a slight. It's been pointed out to me to say that Stan, I think Stan, I truly do. I just wasn't sure what was going on. Which then I'm going to give some credit to Jay, who sort of pointed that out to me, because I hadn't really put two and two together, but I noticed Stan has a new role, at least a clearer role, as vice president of hockey operations under Jim Rutherford. I had the belief that maybe Stan was the advisor to the owner previously. I mean, especially after sort of hearing him speak in the 3 days he was GM. He made it very clear he wasn't necessarily happy with the way things were going, and he felt changes need to happen. And so that's where I sort of feel the influence to ownership occurs. But then to have someone in the inner circle say, I'm not sure if he's sticking around, puts question marks into the air, because that, I think muddies the waters. So is this vice president of hockey operations a potential sort of makeup opportunity to Stan that he didn't, was involved? Like it's weird to me that the long exhaustive search was 2 days. But then Stan, who we as Canucks fans were like, wow, man, let's have this guy talk to us a whole lot more. We could really dig it. And we're getting anything from Jim Rutherford, but now we know what Stan is. So I'm just curious, like, how do you think that came to be?
I think that Stan's new role probably does have a lot more pull than advisor to the general manager, and potentially, the moves that we saw with the AGMs being let go was potentially something that maybe someone who is sort of advising a general manager at the time, Stan Smeel was kind of the intern GM, and I don't think it was his decision. It felt like the way that we got the answer from Aquilini was that it kind of was his decision to make sure that it was a culture change, right? And I'm interested to see if we do hear from Stan Smeel, because obviously he got glowing reviews after he spoke to the media, and his passion for this team, might not be. I don't think anyone can really rival what we just saw from Stan Smeel in the limited availabilities that we saw with him. So there is a spot for a guy like that to contribute in the front office. I don't know exactly how much he's going to be making decisions about the group, but I think we even heard about it. Maybe was it? It could have been the first media availability after all the changes, but to hear the players have Stan Smeel come talk to them, I think it might have been after a practice, and to have that type of, I guess, just kind of influence into the players' minds about how they can change things around, how they want to represent themselves as Canucks. we heard it so often, and we still hear it from Bo Horvat, like playing Canucks hockey. We heard that from Travis Green a lot. This isn't Canucks hockey. Jim Benning saying we want to get to Canucks hockey, meat and potatoes, all this stuff. I want to get to the Canucks hockey that Stan Smeal's talking about, right? That's what I would like to see. And I like the addition, and I guess not really the addition, but I guess the movement for him in management. And I think he can contribute a lot to this team, whether if it's just giving the guys, setting the culture in the right way. And I think that it felt like we didn't hear any of that. Hopefully it was going on behind the scenes for this long amount of time that Smeal has been with the organization, but we never really heard about it publicly. So I'm curious to see if we do hear about it publicly more now moving forward with Smeal in his new role.
It came up on Twitter where someone had said, Stan Smeal was the type of player who, players wanted to play with because you would go through the wall for him. And I had sort of replied to say, well, yeah, you totally would. The thing was, Stan already went through the wall in front of you. You were wanting to go because that's just sort of how he led. And I feel that, for all of the troubles the Vancouver Canucks have had over the years. I mean, I can't go all the way back. I started, paying attention in the 80s. You had Stan to Trevor to, unfortunately, avoid, but there was a Marcus Nazzle in there, picked up in a bit. When he came back, I feel there was an influence, and then you had that sort of transition to the Sedins. And I feel that one of the things the Vancouver Canucks have been served well is that the captains that they've had for the most part, back to sort of, Stan Smeal as a leader, and you could even go back to Orland Kurtenbach, there is a certain way that you are as a Canuck. And it's interesting to see how nearly every captain that the Vancouver Canucks have had that has had any level of success, still with the organization in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. And I think that's a good thing, right? That's a good thing for your organization to have guys that have been able to do it before them, set that kind of level of expectation for you to be a leader. And I think that you're right. The Canucks have had good leaders throughout the ages in that spot. And I think Bo Horvat is in the right area for that. And I think it'll be interesting to watch this team when they do get to that level of being a team that is competing in the playoffs every year. I think that's when a captain is even more important, as not only, right now the Canucks are trying to get into the playoffs. When you're a team that's always in the playoffs, captains look a little different when you're getting them year after year back into the playoffs. So I'm excited to see kind of how Bo has grown into that role. I think he's done a pretty good job as a captain so far. He might not be the loud, obnoxious captain that maybe obnoxious isn't the right word, but boisterous captain. Like a lot of people would like to see JT Miller have the C on his chest the way he acts, and certain things like that. But I think for the media market that we have here in Vancouver, I think Horvat is a pretty good decision on that point. Have I ever, maybe you've heard like my Stan Smeal story about my first time ever on radio as well? Because I've been a Stan Smeal hater for a while, which
Really?
I probably the only person in Vancouver. But so I was at training camp for the Vancouver Canucks when they're in Victoria, I believe would have been 2018 or 19. My years are completely mixed up here, but it was training camp in Victoria that year. I'm guessing 2018, I think. And I was just about set to go on my first 650 hit it with Satyar Shah. I mean, the station was pretty new at the time. It was a big training camp, and I was there all week, and I covered prospects hard, and I got an opportunity to talk about the prospects, and Sat sends me a text, and he's like, yeah, come by 12:15. We'll get you on, come on for 15 minutes, talk about the team and the young guys and what you've liked about them. So I get there, I sit there, I put on the headset. I'm all so excited. My first ever radio hit. And I sit down. He asked me one question. It's about Jake Virtanen or something. Because it was Jake had that bad, he came in out of shape and he skated with the third group.
Yep.
And then he had a good bounce back day on day 2. And I answer one question. And then I get tapped on the shoulder from Canberra, who was just a producer at the time and now my boss. And he's like, get out. And I'm like, okay. So I like hand him the headset, and then when he walks me over, and then he gives it to Stan Smeal. Smeal sits down. He's like, sorry, man, we got to bump you for Stan Smeal. So it's like, wow, I got bumped for, I mean, of course they would, but for me as like a guy who was just getting his first ever hit on radio, the radio host says my name, brings me in to talk. I was so excited. And I answered one question about Jake Virtanen, and then got my headset pulled off my head by the producer so that Stan Smeal could come on instead.
So you hated the Steamer because he stole your spotlight.
Yes, I did for a couple years there, and then he came out, and when the spotlight was on him, he changed my tune. I'm now I'm back to being a fan of Stan Smeal after that little incident in Victoria.
Yeah, I think if you look back to some of our shows when I've referred to Stan Smeal as having sort of a job with the life of the Vancouver Canucks, my problem with the Vancouver Canucks is that they do seem to give jobs for life to different people that sometimes I wonder why. And this is not a knock against Stan. It's just it's not always clear as to what they do and how they contribute. Right. But as a person, I have only ever interacted with him once, and it was just so brief that the most I can say is he was gracious to a young kid who happened to be in a Canucks dressing
See,
room.
he was the opposite to me. The only interaction I had was him pulling a headset off and jumping into my spot. So I'm in the opposite spot as you, Chris.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we'll have stories that we can share, and obviously, our how things occur to us can always evolve as they have in your case, and a little bit to mine. But first of all, thanks for hanging out with me for just over an hour here. It's always good to have you on the show. It's been a while. I mean, I don't think we've had you virtually. If I remember, last time would have been the Hot Box.
Yeah, I guess so. And that was just when I moved over here for the first time. I was like, that was when I was doing the podcast rounds. I was like, now that I moved over to Vancouver, I was excited to hop on because Chris, I've been listening to you guys since I was at the mill working those late night shifts, and waiting for Monday night because you guys would post at about 11:30, and I'd get that update. I'm like, perfect, another hour off of my night shift as I'm getting towards 3 a.m. So I'm very happy to join you guys anytime because you helped me out on a lot of those late night shifts at the mill.
Well, I'm glad that we helped you, and I didn't happen to, put you asleep at the mill. It would be a very, very dangerous situation.
Maybe once or twice, but I never mention it.
But no, it's good to have you on. We'll have to obviously get you back, much sooner than we have this time around. Obviously, with Anna and I, there's always room at the table, so to speak. But I'm curious. I mean, you having everything on the go. You already said that you're going to be on 650 a handful of times over the next couple of weeks, obviously. But do you have any exciting plans for the holidays, or is it just work?
I'm going to take Christmas Day off. So that'll be nice. I went back to the island last weekend. That was kind of my little getaway. Which was really good just to see I haven't seen friends in 8 months or something, where there's been some tough days where it's like I wake up, go to work, go do the podcast, write articles, and it's like 16-hour work days. I have a lot more of those than I don't. So it's Saturday, I'm looking forward to just the one day off where I'm going to wake up on Christmas morning. The girlfriend and I are going to crack a little bit of champagne, have some mimosas in the morning, cook a turkey up all day. Just me and her. Nice, easy Christmas day. Don't have too much going on. Going to cook a little turkey. We picked that up yesterday. So little turkey, have that, and just relax. Maybe have some Baileys and hot chocolate later in the night, and then wake up on Boxing Day, and it's time for World Juniors. So I got a lot of articles to write about that, even though there's only one Canucks prospect there. But one full day off is going to be really nice here on Christmas.
Well, I'm glad you get one day off.
Yeah, well, that's the unfortunate life.
I'm happy for you.
The unfortunate life of a blogger as a big source of income is you got to get that number count up. They don't pay you for not writing. So
sorry. Wait, you get paid as a blogger? Man, when I was a blogger, I think what I was offered was exposure, because exposure is. It pays the mortgage. It puts food in the fridge. It's all
no. I've graduated from exposure, but I do remember the exposure days. The funny thing was, like, the two sites that I've been able to write at in my writing career was the Canuck Way, and then obviously Canucks Army Now. And I always thought it was funny looking back. If you go back and see my first articles, both of them are about Eric Goodbranson. So I'm like, wherever I go next, I'm somehow gonna make sure that it's another Eric Goodbranson article.
Wow. I mean, you got to keep this trend going on. You're right. I would be disappointed if that's not the case. In fact, Monday afternoon, that's your first afternoon hosting gig, right? Like outside of
that'll be our first time doing like a Monday to Friday regular hours. We're going to be taking over for the afternoon show, 12 to 3, doing Sportsnet Today. Sportsnet Today with Bick, which will instead just be myself and David Quadrelli, which we're excited for.
Cool. And maybe you can do a little bit with Goodbranson, right?
Yeah, I mean, we can probably make the call, see what he's up to right now.
But no, it's been good to have you on. For some reason, if people are looking for you because they have not already found you, again, I would be blown away if some of our listeners don't know where to find you. I would imagine Anna's mom knows about Chris Faber. Hi, Anna's
That
mom.
would be great. If not, yeah, please throw us a follow, Anna's mom, and send me some candy from like some of my favorite candy is British candy. They have these like gummy, sort of like almost gummy marshmallow mix. Maybe they know kind of what I'm talking about here, but it's kind of just like mixed. It's like a gummy, but it has more of a marshmallow texture, and it's some of my favorite candy. It's like little Coke bottles, but they're the British version, and they're so good.
I have no idea what you're talking about, but I am sure
Anna's
Anna
mom
does.
hopefully knows.
Yeah. If you're looking for Chris, you can obviously find him at Canucks Army. You can find him on 650 with Faber and Quads on Saturdays, obviously over the course of the holidays during the afternoon show. Chris Faber 39 on Twitter. Have I left anything out?
No, that's probably it. If you hear really good rejoiner music that sounds like you're in a club, that's what I play out of commercials every time. That's when you know I'm producing, because all the other producers
Gotcha.
are, slow music coming back from break. If you hear some sort of club mix that you would hear in Spain at 4 a.m. at one of these nightclubs, that's me behind the board.
Okay, I will file that to memory here. But if you enjoyed having Chris on the show, what do you need to do? You need to do what others do. You tweet him anytime I say, what guest should we get on? I think you and Quadrelli get the most tweets, and I like that because it means you get tagged and pinged. But for our listeners, they can let us know in the C4 Discord, discord.io/C4 Discord, or C4 Podcast. Both will work. We also have the C4 text line, 604-200-6201, 604-200-6201. If you drop a text message, I will read it verbatim. And if you happen to actually leave a voicemail, which is also possible, I will play it. I have yet to have someone take me up on the offer of trying to make their own ad spot. But if Canucks Conversation wants to advertise on C4, that might be the way
I think right now we're looking at buying the Ka from Pucks on Net, as they have that up for sale.
Oh, really?
With a certain Patreon level, I think. So we might that would be kind of funny to make Ryan have to read an ad about another podcast. So we're looking into that right now with some of our Patreon money to kind of throw around.
Yeah, I had to buy the Ka, man. That's some next level Patreon podcast.
Yeah, I feel like that's kind of
there.
like controlling the monopoly of Canucks podcasts. So if you're literally buying ad spots on other podcasts,
podcasts. Well, I mean, you got to consider there's 138 of them, and many of them have patron opportunities such as that. So it could be some smart money. I mean,
yeah, we'll look into it.
Yeah. But on behalf of Chris, who again you can find on Twitter at Chris Faber 39, myself, Chris at Lightforce, and the still away enjoying home time, Anna Forsyth at 84603. You are listening to the C4 Canucks Hockey Podcast and CanucksHockeyBlog.com, the full press coverage network. And by the way, we out.